Well, it really gives me great pleasure to introduce the final session of what has been uh, an amazing Black Mobilities conference. I know some of you have been here for the whole 2 days. Some of you have been popping in and out, but we've had over 20 wonderful papers across such a range, not only of chronologies right from the 17th century to now, but also geographies. We've not been that much in the Pacific, but we've been virtually everywhere else. We've had uh, also just such a variety of kind of different diasporas we've been talking about, and talking about into Black mobilities all over the place. So it has been a quite a brilliant journey for the last couple of days. When Astrid wanted to organise this conference, we felt it would be really important, and Astrid was very keen right from the start to have an artists and creative practitioners panel at the as a high point of the conference, and and we wanted to bring together people with a relationship to the North and a relationship to the Black Atlantic, and that was the idea of this, and really it chimes in with IBAR and the way IBAR's worked from the start. When Labaina Hamid and I decided to construct IBAR in about 2013, one of the things which was really important from us at the start was creative practitioners, and that they should be at the centre of what we do. And so Labaina, my fellow director of IBAR, and I have been keen on that from the start, and we've had many a conference around the arts, including and most spectacularly the conference in just before lockdown on Black women artists, which was a stunning success with about 80 people in attendance. But also the other thing that's been important from us, the staff, is where we are. And our first large cultural event was the Black Atlantic in the North. And that was seen by us as being absolutely crucial, that in fact, there is far too much talk when we talk about the Black Atlantic. It's far too much concentrated always on those metropoles, especially London, Paris, etc. And they're exceptionally important, but we often lose sight of what goes on elsewhere. And as Johnny Pitts, who's also we've had speaking at IBAR, and who's a great friend of IBAR, has said a lot that being his experience in Sheffield is as important as his experience as a diasporan African in lots of ways. And Carol Phillips, who was at our first meeting, the Black Atlantic in the North, we had lots of fun with Kaz, and Kaz's big thing was he loved it when I said that his writing reminded me more of Alan Bennett than Toni Morrison, and I think he appreciated that. We had quite a good debate about it anyway, at least. So that's the reason for this session anyway, at least. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a long form discussion after this. After each of the artists has had a chance to talk about their work. So we'll just I'm going to introduce Teo Aluku first. And Teo is a great friend of IBAR's. He's probably been at been a key person at half a dozen, if not more, of our events. And that's because of his amazing uh, uh, interaction with some of the greats of the Black Atlantic, and especially Paul Robeson. His Paul Robeson show, if you get a chance to ever go and see it, It is absolutely incredible. And Teo's voice as he sings and his voice as he orates is a tremendous tribute to the amazing person that was Paul Robeson. He's a Liverpool-based Nigerian playwright, stage and TV actor and singer. He's toured the world with his two monodramas, Cool Mr. Robeson and Just an Ordinary Lawyer, which is a play about a Nigerian lawyer. His two newest projects are Exploring Greatness, which places the pandemic in the context of imperialist history, and Paul Robeson's Love Song, an audio play which is available online. So, Teo, I see your presentation's ready to go, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Cheers, Teo.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good greetings, everybody, wherever you are, wherever you've traveled in from to my desktop. Um, I will start with a little bit from Just an Ordinary Lawyer, where I have a barrister that my character goes to his chambers looking for a job. And this white man says, "Now look here, I know that you Nigerians are coming here in ever increasing numbers for your education, but as far as I know, most of them get it and go straight back home. You say in your letter, where is it? Yes. I hope to establish myself as one of the first African barristers in London and pave the way for others who wish to contribute to the profession in the hallowed courts of England." End quote. Well, I suggest you leave English courts to English gentlemen, get on the next boat, and go and establish yourself back home in Bongo, Bongo land. So that was my imagined exchange between a Nigerian who came to England in 1945 called Tunji Showande, but his story or my story mirrors his in a to a certain extent because I came here for education for A levels, and I had planned that after my education as an architect, I would go back home.
Teo, I don't think your slides are moving forward.
I haven't moved it yet.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, so home was Nigeria. I was actually born in Ibadan. My parents had been from were from Ilesha, and they moved to Ibadan, where I was born, and they moved to Lagos, where I spent most of my life. And this is a picture of the siblings in the family. And I will let you know which one I am at the end of that, at the end of this. One or two of you already know, but I'll just give you a clue. It's not the girl carrying the baby. Um, so I was born in Ibadan, in Nigeria. My parents, with there's this migrations theme. My parents had migrated from Ilesha to Ibadan, and then we moved to Lagos, um, which is where I spent most of my childhood. And that's me and my siblings, uh, not the sister. Okay, so I found myself in Liverpool, where I was studying architecture, and the plan was to go back to Nigeria and become a successful architect. And in this building in Liverpool, I was singing one morning and was told by a lady afterwards that I reminded her of Paul Robeson. I then researched him and thought, wow, this is an amazing story that needs to be told. And some 10 years later, I premiered my play called Mr. Robeson, which has taken me around the world, literally. Further south I have been was to New Zealand, and this is a picture of me in Adelaide, Australia. Um, and places in between, Jamaica, the US and Canada. And in Canada, the furthest north I have been was to somewhere above the Arctic Circle. Um, and I will finish with a little bit of reading from that experience. So what I've been doing is, doing my own bit of migrating around the globe, telling stories of Paul Robeson and Tunji Shawande, Britain's first black judge, and seeing how people before us, before me, have sort of paved the way for me to be able to actually move around the world freely to tell these stories. Um, and most recently, I have during lockdown, I wrote a play called Greatness in a Time of COVID, which was a reaction to the way Boris Johnson and America's 45th president were reacting to COVID at the beginning, saying that the greatness of their histories, their empires, would see them through. And by coincidence, it is those two countries that have had among the worst um, uh, cases of COVID in the world. And this is one picture of people who died um, on the front lines, nurses, doctors, and other key workers. So greatness in a time of COVID was a response, a tribute to them, but also an acknowledgement of the fact that all these people tended to have migrated from places that had been colonized by these empires. So for me, I am one of all these people who, over the decades and centuries, have been traveling in search of whatever it is we are in search of. And um, when I went to Inuvik above the north, at the Arctic, performing Call Mr. Robeson, I wrote one or two things. Here in a blog, I said, 22 degrees below freezing was unseasonably warm for this time of the year, I had been told. Even with the icy winds making it feel much colder and the darkness descending just after midday, my heart warmed with the thought that, well clad head to toe, I had finally made it into the Arctic Circle alive, all digits intact. I had barely shaken the snow off my boots when an unexpected welcome startled me. My Niger brother, how now? So that was a Nigerian who had the cleaning contract at the airport in Inuvik. I was also reminded earlier this week, I said in 2016, of an African American who had been through these parts over 100 years ago. Matthew Henson was part of a 1909 polar expedition to Greenland and claimed to have been the first person to reach the geographic North Pole, although the white leader of the expedition is the one who received the credit. The facts remain disputed to this day, I believe, but suffice it to say that however honored I am to be declared a member of the Order of Arctic Adventurers, we mustn't forget that we have reached here by following footprints that another greater people have left in the snow. So it turns out that that's what I've been trying to do, to uncover stories of people who've gone before and who may have been forgotten. And what I'm currently working on now is a screenplay about that black gentleman you see in the photograph who arrived in Liverpool from Nigeria in 1915, ended up being called the African Saint because he set up a social service in the African Church's mission. Pastor Daniel Zakate was his name. And so that's what I've been doing and what I hope to continue doing. And that's who I am. And I am the baby in the picture being carried by my sister. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tao. It's lovely to get that autobiographical look at your work. We're now going to move on to Christine Ayene. I'll just give her a brief introduction. Christine Ayene is an art historian and curator. She's a research fellow in contemporary art at the University of Central Lancashire, where she works on the Making Histories Visible interdisciplinary visual arts project research project. She's also a PhD candidate at Birkbeck, University of London. Is writing a thesis exploring the links between African literature and image making processes in the work of South African photographer George Hallett. Her most recent essay is about Tracy Rose, Black feminist rereadings of radical art practice. She's also contributed to the exhibition catalogue Glabana Himid, Tate Modern 2021, which is a brilliant little essay and just an amazing thing. We've got Glabana Himid there at Tate Modern and many people involved in IBAR kind of contributing. Lisa Merrill, who's a great friend of ours, is in that Tate Modern catalogue as well. And she's also contributed to the book Feminist Art, Activism and Artivisms from 2020. Her latest monograph is entitled Sounds Like Her, Gender, Sound Art and Sonic Practices from 2019. And most excitingly, she's the artistic director of the Casablanca Biennale, which is happening this year in 2022. I'll hand over to you now, Christine. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about the inspirations behind my curatorial practice in relation to the conference and the idea of mobilities. So really for me, art has been a psychological and emotional refuge, a safe space in a hostile environment, in the place where I was born in Paris, in France, but was always considered a foreigner in a society where my Black African body was either unwanted or sort of exoticized anomaly, and where the image that was projected of me and the people who look like me was always a negative stereotype. That is, of course, when we were represented at all in the intellectual understanding of arts and culture. So my first relationship to art started as a consumer of culture from a very young age through music, and notably through Bikutsi music, which is a traditional genre from where my parents hail from in Cameroon. So Tayo just before showed the map of Nigeria, and next to it is Cameroon. And so this is the place where my parents are from, and they brought with them when they went to France. They brought our music, and they used it as a tool to transmit our to us, me and my siblings, our cultural heritage. So music was my first Cameroonian cultural anchorage in a place that made me understand loud and clear that I did not belong. And then reggae music and hip hop was sort of a second anchorage, more global in the sense of a Black diasporic cultural identification. So, in a way, my intellectual formation and critical thinking began not with books so much, but through music. So, it was interesting for me as well to hear the presentation of David this morning. Um, the first visual artist I met was Gerard Sekoto, a pioneering Black South African modern painting who went in exile in France in 1947. So Gerard Sekoto was born in 1913. He died in 1993 in France. So I met him when I was 12 years old, and I met him for the last 10 years of his life. But that was enough to set my path in the arts. And Gerard Sekoto was and still is overlooked by French art historians and institutions. My MA dissertation on his work was the beginning of my journey as an art historian and later as a curator to get art institutions to acknowledge underrepresented artists, and beyond that, to connect these art histories and practices with audiences who share the same cultural heritage, especially young people, so that they can feel represented in the culture of the society in which they live. This has manifested through numerous projects in writing, curating, and exhibitions featuring African and diaspora artists, through the exploration of visual representation. So I curated many projects on photography, feminist art, as I've always been interested in in the margins, within the margins. So obviously, working with African and diaspora artists, but within that, working with women artists and also working with queer artists. And over the past 7 years, I've also been working in sound art. So I developed projects around sound art practices, where I'm sort of taking the sort of most common or more popular sound pieces or artists, and sort of unpacking the Black narratives within those artworks. For instance, the exhibition All of Us Have a Sense of Rhythm that I curated at David Roberts Art Foundation in 2015 had I presented a course from a piece by John Cage called Our Spring Will Come, but actually the piece was actually inspired by a poem by Langston Hughes, so I'd sort of unpacked those narratives. And lately, my latest project before COVID was Sounds Like Her at New Art Exchange, Women and Sound Art, that toured to York and Oldham between 2019 and 2020. And just through these images, for instance, this artist who's here, Elzam Bala, is an artist who's exploring Bikutsi music, which is the music I grew up with. So in a way, all of the sort of the culture that I got and the encounters that I made as a young person are sort of some things that I explore in my curatorial projects and with which I'm in dialogue with artists. And that's me.
Thanks so much, Christine. It's lovely to have your career distilled like that, but also to find out the kind of autobiographical roots of it as well. So thank you. Our third speaker today is Adam Lowe, and Adam Lowe is the UK's LGBT History Month poet laureate and Yorkshire's Olympic poet for 2012. He's a writer, educator, publisher and performer from Leeds, though he currently lives on the other side of the Pennines in Manchester. Adam has taught at the University of Leeds, University of Central Lancashire, here with us in Preston, has worked at the Poetry School and English Pen. He was named one of the 20 best writers under 40 in Leeds for the LS13 Awards, and his chapbook Precocious was a reader nomination for the Guardian First Book Prize. He was a finalist for the Venture Poetry Awards, Eric Hoffer Award and Lambda Literary Awards, and was selected as one of 10 advanced poets for the Complete Works 2 programme, where he was mentored by next generation poet Patience Agbagbie. The Complete Works was managed by Natalie Teitler and founded by Bernardine Evaristo. He's also an alumnus of Obsidian. I'd just like to add to that he's worked closely with our own Yvonne Reddick on projects around the Anthropocene, I think, as well, and climate change. So it's a very varied and interesting history, biography. Sorry, over to you, Adam.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it somewhat brief, Alan, because I'm aware that we said we were going till 7, and we've still got a lot of questions to talk about. But I'll talk a little bit about myself and the things that I do. So I write a lot about Blackness, queerness, disability, class. I write a lot about how those things come together and how they influence each other. And how I can be situated between multiple identities that sometimes are often quite conflicting. So on my grandmother's side, they're sort of white Irish, but have lived in Yorkshire for about 150 years, and they migrated over themselves, and I have a bit of a history from that, and that's my kind of Leeds identity that I feel very strongly connected to. And then I've got my granddad on the other side, who came from St. Kitts in the Caribbean. He had all these tall tales about where he was from. He said he was partially descended from a Scottish pirate, and apparently Scottish pirates are quite melancholy and prone to suicide. Then he said he was descended from a Portuguese naval officer. And then he said he was raised for the first 6 years of his life as a Catholic, then the next 6 years of his life as a Jew, but actually he was a Methodist. So we have these quite intricate stories about our heritage and where we came from. And they've always really fascinated me, and they've always really intrigued me about who I am, where I come from, how I've been very lucky to explore those over the years, those stories in my work. So I'm primarily a poet, but I've written across forms. I've written poems, plays, fiction, and I was part of a project called Tangled Roots, which was writing about mixed and interracial families in Yorkshire, and I got to kind of write about my experiences there. I've also been lucky enough to do some DNA testing and kind of, you know, find out that my granddad had Nigerian and kind of Kenyan heritage in there before the Caribbean, but also there was that Portuguese aspect that he talked about, and there was some kind of Northern European and things, and all those things have really intrigued me. One of the projects that I am going to work on, I hope, will be a kind of a literary memoir that looks at those apocryphal tales of my history, looks at the kind of the suicidal Scottish pirate, and looks at this Portuguese naval officer who may have been a Sephardi Jew, and, you know, the various things that come into there. I've also got a poetry collection coming out in 2023 called Patterflash. Patterflash is a word in Polari. Polari is kind of gay slang. There's only about 500 or so words, because most of them are to do with rude things that you couldn't say in public. So naturally, it limits what you can do, but I had expanded upon that, added a few things in. I've stolen a lot from my Caribbean heritage, from Black ballroom culture in the US. And so I see the collection as kind of bound together by my love of language and the language that I use, that is informed by Yorkshire, by Manchester, by the Caribbean, by Ireland, and all these different things that comes together, and by my queerness as well. So that's a little bit about me. I could go on, but I'm wary of the time. So thank you for listening.
Brilliant. And we're now going to move on to Jade Montserrat, who, for people in IBAR, doesn't need much introduction. Jade's an artist who works through performance, drawing, paintings, film, installation, sculpture, print and text in absolutely phenomenal ways. And Montserrat was the recipient of the Stuart Hall Foundation Scholarship for her PhD research with myself and Labena Himid here at UCLan, which focused on the development of her practice from her Black diasporic perspective in the north of England. She's exhibited, published and lectured widely. Recent projects include the exhibition of the Cage Clay Peat Trilogy, alongside an exhibition of Gainsborough drawing at York Art Gallery, which just goes on for the next few weeks. She's also got an exhibition currently at the Manchester Art Gallery. You should all go to that. Both of them are wonderful. There's also was one in Denmark. I think it's just finished. Jade is exceptionally prolific. There's always loads going on. I can't wait to hear what she's got to say. Over to you, Jade.
Thank you, Alan. It's really great to hear everyone speak. I wanted to start by paying my respects to the family of Aisling Murphy and her friends, and hearing this once again horrific news about a woman being a woman and murdered. I make work about structural violence and about individual abuses. And I'm sort of reminded of Sarah Reid, in this instance somehow, a Black woman who was imprisoned and is somebody I've referenced in my work, as I have done a lot of victims of abuse and violence and structural racism, and the impact of capitalism, born of industrialism and colonialism and imperialism. I loved hearing about Paul Robeson, and again, I'm thinking about Ira Aldridge and how important it is to get these significant individual stories circulating in schools and in art galleries. And Ira Aldridge is an actor that I have merely skimmed the surface of in reference to the exhibition at Manchester that Alan mentioned. I was really taken by Christine's exhibition Sounds Like Her, and I'm thinking about how sort of protest and the voice is so important and integral to my performance work and the work that I make on paper or on walls, and how that's being curbed in this country, the right to protest. I was taken by the mention of having a safe space and a refuge to work. And in fact, I'm working on a work for Lagos Biennale, so it'd be great to speak with Taya more about that. And the theme of that is refuge. As it will be great to speak with Adam more about diasporan roots and about working as an artist and growing up in the North, which I have done. Today, I suppose I've shifted my mindset somewhat around a work I make. I'm now calling it an artwork. In 2017, I whistle blew. The Tate has been mentioned this evening, and it was impossible for me since 2017 to find how you make a complaint of racism and sexual abuse in Tate. They don't make it easy. They don't want to know. I've been punished for it. It's culminated in last year being censored by Tate. They wouldn't let me work there. And today we filed a claim using the Human Rights Act, under the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms and the Equality Act. I think it's important to be discussing how, in light of mobilities and blackness, how we work in solidarity against structures that are against us. And I think that my very sort of individualized personal plight here is magnified by other artists, other people going through similar situations. So I think that my work now is sort of gaining traction in terms of having to use legal routes and the courts, whereas normally or usually or given the right circumstances, I'd be in a studio and I'd be painting, and I would have a home and I'd have security and I'd be able to make work, and unfortunately it's not quite like that, and I suggest it's not quite like that for many artists under these protected characteristics that we're talking about and that these institutions are supposed to serve. I think maybe my time is up. Thank you for giving me this space to discuss my work a little.
Thank you so much, Jade. Yeah, no, there's a lot to talk about with all of you about the kind of complexities of the issues, and we can see the links between all of you and all of your works, which Jade helped to bring to the fore in her final summing up. And it just sort of shows, to an extent, you know, the Jade going last can make those links, you know, but all of you could have made those links as you went along. I'm going to start with the first question or the first kind of debating point, and then if anyone wants to jump in, if you just sort of do when I've finished it. What I was wanting to think about was how any of your work relates specifically to the North, how it does that, and in what ways it does that, and then really to talk to Jade's final question, how welcoming, and we're not talking about the Tate here, but how welcoming is the North to African Atlantic artistic praxis? Did anyone want to kind of start, and then we'll get the ball rolling on that? We're talking about this geographic space you're in and the challenges and and uh, uh, and rewards of being in this space. And there might not be many rewards. Should we start with Adam?
Yeah, so I think I've been quite lucky in some ways. So I grew up in an area of Leeds called Chapeltown, and Chapeltown has a very large West Indian population. So I grew up, you know, I went to a school where there were loads of black kids, there were a lot of Hindu and Sikh kids, there were a few Jewish kids, and we learned about, you know, all the different histories and traditions and cultures and things. And then when I was about 8.5, we moved across town to Armley, which is quite different demographically. It's mainly a white working class area, although it does have a large Muslim Pakistani group as well. But the school that I went to was a Church of England school, so most of the kids there were white working class, and that was quite different, I guess. And when I grew up, I was acutely aware that there were lots of black artists working in Leeds, and Leeds University is a bit of a hub for lots of sort of left-leaning people who are, you know, very into kind of post-colonial literature and things like that. But I did find that there weren't the opportunities really within Leeds for me as an artist to do as many of the things as I would have liked to have done. And so that was partly why I ended up moving to Manchester. And, you know, ever since I've moved to Manchester, I've found that I've not stopped working. I don't have to look for work. Work has kind of come to me. There is a very well-connected, you know, community of black artists. And I've been very lucky to meet people who've been very supportive of me. But I will also say, I do work for People Tree Press, which is a publishing company based in Leeds, and they focus on Caribbean and Black British writing. So they're doing things. And I've also done a lot of work with Eclipse, which is a Black led theatre who specialise in, you know, producing work by and for Black people. And again, they're also based in Leeds. So I think that there are things in the north that are there in Leeds and in Manchester. I'm sure Tayo could tell us a bit about Liverpool, because I get the feeling that there's some stuff there as well. I guess for me, the biggest issue has been that there can be replication of things because people are not necessarily connected with each other, or there's not necessarily places where we can go to see like our history and to see what has come before us in our cities and, you know, in our communities. Perhaps London is a bit different. I don't know. I know that there are archives in London of black art, for example, but I don't know about other places. And so that's one of the challenges, I guess. And sometimes if you're not in one of the big cities, there can be an issue of remoteness as well.
Oh, Alan, you're mute.
Sorry, maybe go to Christine now, who could talk to us about an archive of black artists. I think you're probably just about to do that.
Yeah, so yes, so I work with Lubaina Hamid, who now left UCLan, but I work on the project called Making Histories Visible, which is basically her archive of the projects that she organized in the 80s, but it's, you know, it's been amplified and has you know, documentation, artwork, by Black artists. And I sort of contributed my small collection of work by George Hallett, on whom I presented, was it yesterday? Today? Um, and yeah, so there are, there are pockets of places, there are places where you can find information, but I guess, I mean, it goes to show that maybe making histories visible is not reaching out to certain, creatives or populations that, as much as we could or we should, but um, yeah, I'm not sure what could be done about that. But there are, making histories visible. We've had curators coming from Nick Aikens, for instance, came from the Netherlands when he did an exhibition on the 80s at Van Abbe Museum, but also it was the exhibition The Places Here at Nottingham Contemporary on Black art, or like Black artists from the 80s. We also had Evan Ifekoya, who's a queer artist who came to the archive and developed their practice, and they've been nominated for the Turner Prize. And so, I mean, I think maybe these kind of conferences are also the platforms where you get information as to, where you can get information closer to where you are, and not just in London.
Great, thank you, Teo. Liverpool, what's the scene like there, and how has it been for nurturing you and yourself as a black artist and performer?
I came to Liverpool to start off as an architect, but my singing and acting was always happening in the background. And I was sure I would never be a professional artist because I enjoyed it too much, and if I had to make money from it, I would stop enjoying it. But the Paul Robeson story came to me, and I started to write a play about him and perform it, and it was showing promise. And at the same time, my work as a professional architect and would-be developer, property developer, was just going downhill. And I was then, this is 2007-8, it was clear to me that I was not welcome in the city as a developer. That's why I became full-time acting, singing, writing, etc. And again, I tried another kind of development more recently, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And the same thing happened to me. I was shafted again, if you don't mind the use of that word. And this time by Liverpool City Council. But there has always been, because Liverpool is the oldest black population, community in the country. So there's always been a thriving black presence artistically as well, and I'm part of it, even if I'm not really in it, because I'm a solo performer. So being welcome or being unwelcome, I'm unwelcome I've been shown to be unwelcome in certain circles, even among Black Liverpool, the Liverpudlians, they're not always welcome. I'm an African immigrant as opposed to Liverpool-born Black, but that's only very, very few people. But it's an interesting coincidence that my current project, which is this proposed TV series about Pastor Daniel Zakate, as I'm writing it, I'm thinking, my goodness, this man arrived in Liverpool 107 years ago, died in 1964. But his life story, I mean, to cut a long story short, he tried to set up the social service based in this building on Mill Street, 112, 120, 122 Mill Street, Liverpool. He called it the African Churches Mission. And for 35 years or so, he got no support from the council or from the government. And what he did get was resistance. And the building was finally demolished. He was almost forcibly moved out and the building demolished. And it stayed an empty site until the around 2000. And I was writing something, my treatment, and I have him saying to a young man, it's funny that the city would rather see an empty site than see a black man develop something. And as I was writing that, I was thinking, my goodness, that's what happened to me. Because on 2 or 3 sites in Liverpool, that's what happened. So I think, with Jade's story, with Pastor Daniel's story, with my story, I mean, these are stories that we have experienced, but we are resilient. And part of the resilience is telling those stories and not letting them get away with it without comment. So yeah, it's been a good place to experience all these things, but it's good to be among people who show that you're not alone when you're fighting.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for that, Teo. We've had 3 quite different experiences. I'd like Jade, maybe even only briefly, but your experience of the Northeast is very different to Adam's, really, growing up in kind of Chapeltown, isn't it? Do you want to just talk about that briefly, because it's very important, I think, to your art?
Yes, thank you. I remember the conception of Tangled Roots. I think there was a call out, and I did apply, I think, because when I was about 13, between 11 and 13, the issue of my hair had got just so, it was encompassing, because I do come from a exclusively white family, and I lived in a rural, well, my mum still lives there, in rural Scarborough, well, the borough of Scarborough, and yeah, so we eventually went through to Chapeltown to a place called Jenny's, and it was a completely different experience for me. And I had my hair straightened with the chemical straightener, which culminated in years later, like I could not go down that route anymore, because, well, there's all sorts of interesting discussions that we could have about that, and thinking about Cabana Mercer's writing on hair, and yeah, but that's how I sort of came to know Leeds, really, and a sense of diversity, I suppose. So yeah, my experience is one of rurality, well, isolation. There was me and my mum and her husband, who I lived with from the age of 4 till in my mid-20s, a solicitor and landowner. Yeah, so I did have a different experience in that sense.
Great, thanks so much for that. I was going to talk next really about diaspora and how your works speak to that diasporic history, and moving on from this, the sort of grounded rootedness, in a sense, to talk about Paul Robeson's roots, and how you've all talked about that a bit in your introductions, but I just wondered if any of you had something else to say about how routed, using the American pronunciation, how routed your work is, and how important the routes that your work has taken have been to you. And for some of you, I mean, Jade, for instance, your name Montserrat, can tell us a lot. you know, because that's not your given name. Maybe if we started with Jade just because of that, even though she's just spoken, and then move out. Jade, does that fair?
Yeah, sure. I was just lost in my memory of hearing Teo singing from the Paul Robeson play, which is, I wonder if he's been doing any online, but yeah, I was just, well, it's inevitable that I either would have stayed in one fixed position. I don't know how that could have happened, really, because I think what I've observed is, or what the resilience that was mentioned by Teo just now means that we might never know why we're taking certain routes. Like, it hadn't occurred to me that there would come a time, I think, where I'd sort of be in this position. I was sort of, what I mean is, I was like holding on for dear life for not to disturb the status quo too much within my family itself. So, for instance, I first asked about my biological father, and my knowing that I was very different and I was made to feel different. I was described as looking like I did because I'd been left in the coal house too long, and you know, by that time I'd been introduced to Sidney Poitier as I mean, a horrible derogatory term. So I was sort of surrounded by these xenophobic, racist ideas and discussions and banter, but and it was really chaotic, and it, you know, alongside me wondering whether, you know, it made me ask funny questions like, was my mum like the Virgin Mary? You know, how could she have had me? Because by that time, when I was sort of by the age of 10 or something, because we lived in such a rural area, we didn't have terrestrial television. The only black person I'd kind of really seen was Eddie Murphy, and my first question was, is Eddie Murphy my dad? You know, so I've arrived here whereby I've taken the island name that at that point I was only, there were sort of suggestions that my biological father had come from Montserrat. That's how, so the routes are inevitable in terms of maintaining some sort of resilience when one can, and also in solidarities and some sort of collective knowledge acquisition and knowledge sharing, and trying to create a different type of world, I suppose, and different types of experiences, and different aspects to our lives itself. You know, when things haven't been great, how do we change that, and how do we ensure that they're not replicated, I suppose. So sorry, I've veered around your question as well, but it's a difficult question.
Yeah, no, I just sort of think that just that explanation of your name is kind of quite important to understanding, you know, understanding yourself and your work, really, in the end, you know. So anyone else want to talk about that aspect, or would you? Yeah, Adam.
So I got married a few months ago, and I'm actually due to change my name. We haven't actually done it yet because we've had lockdown, we've had a honeymoon, we've had various other things. But I was going to change, we're changing our surname to Henry Lowe Roberts, and Henry was my granddad's surname. And it's just because Jade was talking about surnames, and I I made the awful mistake of Googling Henry as a surname and looking in the slave register and seeing it, and also seeing Spencer, which was my granddad's mother's surname. So he had a bit of a complicated issue with names as well, because he was, I think, some of the children were Spencer, some of the children were Henry, and it was to do with falling out with the father and things like that. But he changed his name to Henry later on, which was his mother's surname, I think. And I looked at both names and I just saw them on those lists. So I found one, you know, on St. Kitts, and it was Spencer, and I found another and it said Henry, and just that kind of quiet dread and awfulness when you kind of realize, shit, that is my ancestor, that could have been my granddad, or that could have been, you know, that was a really powerful moment for me, and that was really, yeah, that was quite heavy, and I don't know how else I would experience it. I don't think there's anything quite like it, but just seeing your name in black and white, and then that connection with, oh my God, that was something that happened to my family, and it just made it feel very real. So Jade bringing that up just reminded me of that little story, really. But yeah, I think in terms of the routedness and the rootedness and the kind of moving around, those things have always been of interest to me, and I've always been curious about where I come from and what life was like in the Caribbean. And, you know, my granddad used to make Caribbean curries, but then he never told anyone how he did it. So when he died, it was like, you know, actually, it's really simple to make a curry, how to do it. But he never gave us any of the recipes for any of the things that he had. And so, you know, I remember thinking, I want to get these. I want to have the recipes for my own children, if I have them, and for my nieces and nephews, and then going away and rediscovering things, and sort of taking that route backwards myself and thinking, right, you know, I'm going to create a recipe book of Caribbean things based on what I remember from my granddad, but without having known any of the concrete details. And so now I've got this little cookery book that I've been building up of things that I've tried and that I've refined and tweaked, and, you know, and that's going to go to my niece and nephew, and I'm probably going to end up giving it to my cousins for their children, and me and my husband are starting the process of adoption, so hopefully we will have a child to pass those on to too. And I think that's a nice that's one way that those journeys can kind of be an interesting way of rediscovering ourselves and helping establish the story of who we are as a people and as a family and as individuals. And with any luck, that will go forward now into my family, and it might fill some of those gaps that we think that we have in our history. And it's very obvious to me that one side of my family is much easier to investigate than the other. My granddad's side of the family is very hard to find things out about. You know, I can't find anything about his dad, for example. But on my nana's side, on my white side of the family, we can go back centuries, you know, and find everything there. And so it's just nice to be able to fill that in, I think.
Lovely, thank you, Adam. Maybe sometime there'll be People Tree will publish your book of recipes, and we can all cook them. That would be lovely. Christine
Yes,
wanted to
I do a
say something.
really curry.
Yeah. So yeah, this question of roots and route. I guess for me, I've been interested, like, in my the journey. I mean, in the art started with the connection with South African exiles who left South Africa because of apartheid. Some of them went to England, others to Paris, and I was introduced to those who were in Paris through my elder sister. I have a sister who's 10 years older than me, so she brought all these exiles and activists home. But lately, I've actually, since COVID, and I've sort of taken a different take on life, maybe. And I wanted to, so I didn't my parents separated when I was a kid, when I was maybe 9 years old, and so we've been separated like for 30 years with my dad. And I've sort of reconnected with him the first time, but I couldn't like emotionally bond with him because I didn't, I didn't, yeah, it was difficult develop that. And so I left like 10 or 15 years or so without really talking to him. But now, because he's still alive, I sort of connected with him, and this led to developing a project in the rural area where he's from in Cameroon. So I'm sort of rerouting myself in Cameroon as a way to sort of find my own history as well, because he lives where he was born and my grandparents are from there. But also I'm developing a project to sort of support or encourage young people and work with women as well. And so, yeah, maybe that's that's what, before the conversation, when I was saying I'm going to Cameroon, that's the project I'm going to develop there, and find out about my history, but also connect with it's a rural environment, so I'm interested in plants and vernacular architecture as well. So cooking, is something that I was sort of planning to develop, to invite artists and for them to work with the environment, with plants, with architecture, music, and things like that.
Right, lovely. Teo, do you want to come in for a little brief bit, and then what I'm going to do after Teo finishes speaking is just allow each of you a minute or two just to kind of close the conversation down the way you want to close it, if you like, if you know what I mean. So I'm not going to ask any more of my questions, but I'd just like you could read a poem, Adam, or you could show us a piece of work, Jade, or just to say, or you could just to say something in a minute or two that encapsulates some of the things we've been talking about. Teo, first though, did you have this kind of anything around roots that you wanted to talk about?
Yes. I mean, I showed you where my parents came from and how come it is I am here. And why I am still here, why I didn't go back home to Nigeria after studying, was because I created a daughter. And when her mother told me that she was pregnant, I remember saying, I don't know whether I should be ashamed or proud of this. This is a white Jewish woman. I said, okay, I'll be there for the birth, but after that, I'm not sure. So that daughter is now 33 and is getting married in March. We have a very good relationship. She's marrying a white Londoner who has Irish Catholic, whose mother is Irish Catholic. Leah, my daughter, her grandfather's family had come to London in the 19th century from somewhere in Eastern Europe, Poland, somewhere. So when I depart, whether it's from England, if I go back home to Elisha, which I've been thinking about recently, even though I didn't grow up there, my parents' town, but we have property there, and I've been thinking I would love to go and build something using vernacular, local materials, and have an arts center. When I depart, so I'll be left with Leah, my daughter, who hopefully will produce a grandchild who may look fairer than any of us here. So, that's another potential. Somebody might have to go digging to say that, oh, so you mean your grandfather was from Nigeria? So the thing is, as artists, as people generally, what is it that we leave behind? What is our legacy? And hopefully we've all, thankfully, we've all got stuff that we've left behind in the arts, which speaks to where we've come from and what we'd like to see the world become. So it's taking the possibility of becoming a father-in-law and grandfather to make me start thinking so philosophically.
It's what we all need to do, to think philosophically. Right. So is anyone wanting to start just with this? We've got, say, 1 or 2 minutes each. Will take us to about 5 past 7, which I don't think is too late. 7 or 8 minutes past. If it is too late, Astrid will tell us. Anyone want to kind of just try and wrap this up, and we'll just give you all a chance to do that.
Yeah, I'll go. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, everyone. I wasn't sure what to say this evening or my presentation, so I'd actually taken a little bit from the writing that Alan's been helping me with, and so I'll just read a tiny bit from that. My project, focusing as it does on belonging and heritage, is rooted in a sense of aspiration and colludes with Jonathan Rutherford, who writes, "Such a politics must be the discovery and making of home, the formation of values and collectivities that move beyond the postmodern and its fragmentation of the social." And I use the word home here not only as the making of a sense of self and identity, but as a motive for a culture that values difference and thrives on its own diversity. The task of a cultural politics of difference must be to confront a civil society that is fragmented and turned against itself, poisoned by a class system that destroys human autonomy and creativity. Published in 1990, the text quoted above is critical of the left and is written in opposition to the government at that time, which had been led by Margaret Thatcher for 11 years until November 1990, and then by John Major. Earlier in his essay, Rutherford reminds the reader that the right has mobilized the family and nation as central themes of its hegemonic identity. His argument is in alignment with my project in terms of what it refutes and resists, which is the idea that the nuclear family necessarily described by Thatcher as the unit is, has been, or can be the foundation with which a sense of belonging is necessarily nurtured. Through my art making, I argue for wider safety nets and greater security for queering the family, taking up the mantle of Rutherford's demands, which may indeed be cried today. And I quote, finally, "We need something more than the Labour Party's call for caring values, which suggests an acceptance rather than a transformation of social relationships. A culture of healing and reparation is called for the violence, oppression, and personal humiliation in our society is such that nothing less will do." Thank you.
Thank you, Jade. It's lovely to hear it read out loud after looking it on the page for so long. I hope it's going to be read out loud again and again. Thank you so much for that. Adam or Christine, either of you want to go? If you really don't want to go, that's fine as well. But it'd just be nice to have a summation.
Yeah, I've got. So you said a poem, so then I went.
Oh, a poem would be great.
And this is the one that we read at my granddad's funeral. So because we were talking about my granddad, that's the one that came. It's called Bone Railroad. I will clutch your bones together into a coral palace at the bottom of the sea. I will sing hymns to celebrate you in the vault built from your rib cage. The stained glass I will blow from your dreams. Who cast you down here like a bone railroad from Africa's west coast to the Americas, the Caribbean? Whales will worship you. I will come down and sit upon your coral throne and remember who you were. I will unearth your stories, find the ships that discarded you, and sink them all.
Oh, lovely, Adam. That's a wonderful, wonderful poem. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. Christine.
I haven't got any, like, I don't have a poem ready or anything. I don't know. I, I really don't have anything else to add. I think for me, I mean, what I said earlier about rerouting myself in Cameroon is something that I'm really looking forward, and also it's a way for me to sort of shift the paradigm of the sort of position we have in the West as being a minority, or Black practitioners, and just be in a space where I can just be a sort of a creative person or professional in my field. rather than being a Black person, or, you know. So I'm looking forward to this kind of new. I mean, it's not new because I work a lot in Africa, but like, you know, going back home in a way, where, you know, I wasn't born there, I didn't grow up there, but I have this connection, and I'm really looking forward to that, and seeing, and maybe I hope, you know, giving inspiration to young people there. I mean, the young people I see in Cameroon and that I interact with, who are very dynamic, and yeah, so maybe for another conference I'll be able to share more about the experience.
Yeah. Oh, it's been lovely, and it's been really great learning more about the beforehand and also those plans for the future. Teo, do you have a final thing you'd like to share?
I will share another poem, if I may. The one I referred to earlier, Greatness in a Time of COVID. COVID has sort of, made us create different things, and in my case, taking me off stage onto screen. So it hasn't. It's it's one of the things that we do. We adapt. Greatness in a time of COVID. We made our homes in the belly of the beast that devoured our ancestors and spat them out on the other side of the globe, that stole our gold and rubber, our skills and knowledge, our art and music, our history. It gorged and fattened itself, dressed in unmissable finery, and declared itself proudly the empire. It saw its greatness in our puzzled eyes as we stared up the barrel of a gun from every corner of the earth. Its guns were needed still, we were told, to protect us from the socialists and the communists. Capitalism, our enslaver for centuries, would liberate us one day. It bought our rulers and continued the quiet theft of our humanity and our dignity as it planted poison and bombs where once there was rice and diamonds. And then the virus came, silent, swift, and deadly. We answered the call to the front line to confront this invisible enemy. We asked simply for gloves, masks, visors, and gowns. As we fell one by one, we finally began to see that what the gentle ones had been whispering loudly had been true all along. We'd been feeding on the beast's excrement, unmindful of the fact that the empire has no clothes.
Oh, great. Thanks for sharing that with us, Teo. Some of us have heard it before, but hearing you read it in this context at the end of a two-day conference like that is, I think it's a very fitting end. So thanks so much. I'd like to thank all of our artistic practitioners so much for being with us and for contributing. I know that Astrid wants to close the conference now. So I don't think there's time for wider questions. I'm sure all the artists will be happy to take questions remotely in the future. You know, so you could send some questions you might have to Astrid or Andrea or myself, and we can pass them on. Or indeed, I'm going to stay on afterwards for a few minutes, and any of the artists and anyone else here is welcome to do so as well. Anyway, we'll hand over to, there's stuff going in the chat. People are putting their contact details or whatever in the chat as well, who want to be contacted directly. But I'll hand over to Astrid now to close the conference. But before I do that, I want to have a round of applause, both virtually and real, for a wonderful session with our artists and practitioners.
right. Thank you, Adam. Thanks also on my part for appearing here to all of the practitioners who just participated in the roundtable. It's wonderful that you responded so enthusiastically to my invitation that you come here. So this is something, and I really appreciate what you've been doing and your contributions. And concerning getting in contact, everybody who participates in the conference should have received first of all, the conference booklet, which gives the contact addresses of all participants. We are not sharing that on the internet for wider audiences, but you should have gotten that. And I will also send out an email, a thank you email to everybody, so you can find each other's email address as well there. So you can get in contact, and I'm sure our artists are not so aloof that they will be not responding to earnest queries about your work. So I definitely have appreciated this approachability from you. And yes, I'd like to sort of move over to a very quick valedictory address, a few words of goodbye. I'd like to welcome all of you who are listening here once again. It's good to see you for this final piece of the conference on Black mobilities in the Atlantic world. Over the past 2 days, we've met to listen to various academic papers, as well as artistic presentations, the roundtable here, as well as some presentations by artists in the different panels earlier. They have touched upon various aspects of the Black Atlantic, made us rethink, revisit the Black Atlantic, questioning and trying to reformulate it. Issues of Black mobilities as well as immobilities, of course. Unfortunately, we cannot exclude them because they have been so much part of the Black experience. And we have really covered a wide range of time periods. We've assembled researchers and artists from Finland to Colombia, from South Africa to the United States. So this is really encircling the Atlantic on the different continents that are creating this circum-Atlantic. And I've really appreciated that you've come to this conference. So everybody who's been contributing here as a speaker, who is listening here and maybe asking questions as an audience member without speaking themselves, I appreciate your coming. We had literally 100 people here who've attended at least one session. I would never, ever have expected that for a conference that featured like 21 speakers. So this is really, I'm absolutely stunned and amazed at this this outcome of the conference, that we really had this reach. And looking ahead, I'd definitely like to stay in touch with you, maybe think about future events, collaborations. We do have a tentative interest, an expression of interest by an editor of the University of Edinburgh Press, no, Edinburgh University Press, they are called. There's nothing definite right now, but I will contact them again, show them what we've done here, and maybe we will develop some kind of a book project, and I would be contacting you again to send out a call for articles for anybody who is interested in contributing, and then we can make a nice selection of people who will be then contributing to a conference volume that really ideally brings us forward also with this concept of rethinking the Black Atlantic in a way that includes all the different areas and time periods that we've been discussing. And that leaves me with one pleasant final act. And that is to say thank you. I've already thanked everybody who participates, but I should also acknowledge our sponsors. This conference was part of a research project, or connected to a research project of mine, which was funded by a Marie Curie Fellowship by the European Union. So I acknowledge their sponsorship of giving me work for 2 years until the end of the month. Also, I've really been well received by IBAR as an institute, as well as by UCLA and the University of Central Lancashire in general, and I definitely would like to express my gratitude for this support I've received here, and would also then include support for the conference that we are staging here. There are 3 individuals I would like to thank in particular. One is Jake Woods, who's been doing the tech help here, and also in preparation of the conference has been giving advice and support and help with technological issues. Then secondly, Alan Rice for general support and advice in many areas, also as one of the co-directors of IBAR. Also the director of MIDEX. I should mention MIDEX has also given us a grant that allowed us to finance our keynote speakers and the roundtable discussions. And so I'd like to express my thank you to them as well. And finally, my absolutely greatest thank you goes to Dr. Andrea Sillis, who has been my conference manager, assistant, and without your work, I wouldn't have been able to do this here. So this is absolutely wonderful what you've done. If we were meeting in a physical ceremony, I would be handing out flowers, bottles of wine, chocolate, whatever. I've recursed to digital goodies. So in your case, you should be receiving some vouchers for buying books or other items you would like to have. Alan, you're getting a non-digital voucher from Atkinson's because I know that you reject those corporate giants that are dominating online sales. So that's a personal way of saying thank you to everybody who's been central to making this conference a success.